live, and we'll endeavour to answer some of your questions. So Spaceoneers, we're a brand of design and data, a multimedia company based in Cologne, Germany. We specialise in communications for space and science. So we've developed Spaceoneers into one of the most important community portals in the European new space sector. So we have a new space calendar highlighting some of the top European space and startup activities, most recently featuring webinars. Our portal features news and interviews with founders from the space scene with infographics on current space topics and markets. So we also include a map of all different startups and scale-ups in the space industry across Europe. So to our panel, space is a growing market with many startups emerging. Various business incubation centres are helping to inspire and work with entrepreneurs to foster business ideas to fully commercial startup companies. So in this webinar, we get a perspective of different space clusters across Europe, specifically in the UK, France, Portugal, and Luxembourg. So first I introduce Romain Ernie, Director of Mobility and Space in the Choose Paris region. Romain leads the Paris region's consultant practice for urban mobility and new space sectors. He has 10 plus years of experience advising companies looking to expand and plug into the regional ecosystem. And he is the co-founder of the Space Paris Region Initiative. So Ernie, do you want to just say a brief hello?
Hello, Ryan, and thanks for the invitation, and hello, everyone.
Yeah. So second, we have Joanna Hart. So she's the Harwell Space Cluster Development Manager, working with stakeholders to strengthen the Harwell Space Cluster, attracting new companies to Harwell Campus, and helping those already there to grow. So since taking up the role, the Harwell Space Cluster has grown to 105 space organizations, employing over 1,100 people from 80 organizations, employing 800 in December 2017. I'm sure we'll learn a lot more about that from Joanna. So Joanna, do you want to just say a quick hello?
Yes, hello. Thanks very much for inviting me. Look forward to finding out more about the other clusters as well.
We also have Dr. Kira Manfletti, the president of the Portuguese Space Agency, Portugal Space. So she previously worked for the German Aerospace Centre, DLR, as a research engineer in the field of liquid propulsion, liquid rocket propulsion. In 2016, she joined the European Space Agency, where she was also the program advisor to the Director General. Do you want to say hello, Kira?
Hello, good afternoon. Great to be here.
And finally, we have Sarah Fleischer, who joins us from the Luxembourg Space Agency. As the agency's economic advisor, she's developing new financial solutions to meet the needs of a growing space ecosystem in Luxembourg, such as successful launch of early stage space fund Orbital Ventures. Currently, she's busy setting up the business division and startup incubator for the forthcoming European Space Resource Innovation Centre. Additionally, she's teaching entrepreneurial space finance at the University of Luxembourg. So, hello, Sarah.
Hi, everybody.
So, so a big thank you to all our panelists for joining us. So what I've asked is that each of the panelists present briefly for 5 minutes before we enter a Q&A. So, so first up, we have Romain. Do you want to present your slides there?
Yeah, sure. Is it? So do you see my slide? Yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Ryan, again. I won't be too long, just a quick introduction, but yeah. So I'm the co-founder of Space Paris Region. Space Paris Region is public initiatives. We are basically three co-founder. First one is the Aztec cluster, which is more dedicated to R&D project. The second one is the Paris Saclay cluster, one of the top innovator cluster in Europe. And the last one is Choose Paris Region, the organization I work for. And our major goal is to support international companies that want to set up in the Paris region. So very quick introduction, but why the Paris region? We do have three major advantage in our mind. So first is the talented workforce with top universities, and most of the universities are promoting space careers. The second one is a unique AI and what we call in French deep tech. It's machine learning and big data ecosystem. That when you combine this ecosystem to the space ecosystem, it gives you a competitive advantage. And the last point is a solid public partnership through a long-term partnership. So I won't be too long. You see the figures. We are one of the most important economic region with London and with some other cities in Germany. But this picture to give you an idea of this is the Central Supélec new campus, and at the end of the picture, you see you can imagine that there is a space center with 80 students working on topics with the ecosystem. So that's very important for us that the universities are promoting space careers for those students. Paris region, a strong space industry. It's not very well known, but we have it's an historical industry for us. You can see some space actors right now, but right here. But there is more SMEs and new startups that just been created in the Paris region. And what I mentioned in my introduction is that we have a lot of international AI centers for big companies, including French and international companies. And this is what we think that the Paris region could be very attractive for companies, especially those who are developing space application. So I would like to mention some of them, like Keros, the French, they are providing an asset observation platform, or Geoflex, they are using a hypergeolocation for space and space data. And also we can mention Astrome, an Indian startup that recently set up R&D operation in the Paris region. So yes, last point is this solid public support through a long-term partnership. And one of our key measures is the R&D tax credits in France. So you can have a lot of money back from the French government. It's called in French Crédit d'impôt recherche, and it's very used for very popular from the aeronautics and space industry in France. So again, yes, let's stay connected and stay tuned. We have a newsletter. We have a website called spaceparisregion.com, and we have a monthly newsletter. So if you want to join us, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Romain. So next up, we have Dr. Joanna Hart from the Harwell Space Cluster. So Joanna, would you like to just bring up your slide?
Let me share my screen, and hopefully you can see that if I go onto presentation. It's getting there. Hopefully that works. As Ryan mentioned, I'm Harwell Space Cluster Development Manager, looking to try and raise the profile of the Harwell Space Cluster and all the organisations within it. Currently, we've got about 105 space organisations, which collectively employ 1,100 at Harwell Campus, which is about half an hour from Oxford, about 45 minutes from Heathrow Airport. As you can see from the picture there, there's also a synchrotron at Harwell, so some very large-scale scientific facilities and capabilities. It's not just about space, although space is an important part of it. But the fact that we've got those other facilities is important, because what it's doing is enabling other sectors to have an interest in being there as well. So we're not just about space, we've also got a health tech cluster and an energy tech cluster, with people working on areas from, at the moment, studying the COVID-19 virus to looking at clean energy growth and also batteries as well within the energy tech. And that's a real opportunity for space companies, because they get to interact not just with themselves, but also interact at the crossover with those other sectors, something that we call multidisciplinary innovation. The obvious one in space is microgravity, where space is providing the platform for health companies to be able to develop new drugs, particularly in the microgravity space. So there are lots of opportunities there, and that's what we try and work towards. We have some very significant space facilities. There's a brand new satellite test facility that's going in at the moment, despite the current situation, and that will be able to test large constellations of satellites and also test larger satellites, and it's available on a commercial basis, as are all the other facilities available. You can see one thermal vacuum chamber. You can also see an operations centre. So lots of facilities that people can use on a commercial basis. Having all of those companies has also been helped by having the main funding and the support organisations that you've got within the UK at Harwell as well. So the Satellite Applications Catapult, particularly focused on the downstream satellite applications perspective. ESA's headquarters, particularly looking at applications and telecoms, is also at Harwell, and the UK Space Agency has a presence, as well as STFC, which runs Harwell Space, which has lots of facilities and capability as well. Having all of those in one place really helps to set the scene and has encouraged a large number of other companies to set up a presence there. Through the European Space Agency, we have a business incubation centre, which I know we're hearing from some others as well. It's great because that incubation, those new ideas can get funded and be given advice and support at the early stage in their startup journey. And about a third of those business incubatees stay on at Harwell Space Cluster. And it's been a fairly successful incubation centre. They've had 85 incubatees so far, and the alumni from there has raised over £73 million to date in equity. So it's been going for 10 years and is doing well. You can see from the list of companies here that there's a whole range of companies, from the startups that have been through the incubation centre to companies that have built their business from startup through to small business, some of which now have sort of 50 people, like Oxford Space Systems with its deployable antennas, or Resitech, which uses space data to service the forestry and the utility industry. And then there's a whole range of multinationals that have, in many cases, have a relatively small presence, but they're really keen to engage with that innovation ecosystem. And I have to say, I'm really missing it at the moment because I'm working from home, as probably many of you are as well. And I haven't had that opportunity to just bump into people and get the sense of what's going on in the sector, which I normally do, particularly around the coffee shop. Can't think why. But there's always lots going on. There's lots of events and lots of workshops bringing people together, trying to really make the most of the opportunities and investigate the opportunities to collaborate between each other and more broadly. And I host lots of events and international delegations. This feels like another era, but this was last year. And with so many companies with such great technology, there's always something new to show off. And some of the companies in the space cluster actually started with some space technology, but have moved on to use that in a new sector like Kite and Miraco that are using space spectrometers to look at more heavy industrial processes. So that's it from me. It's an exciting place to be. Lots of facilities, the other clusters as well, enabling that multidisciplinary innovation. And I work very closely with all of the key stakeholders across the UK to really make this work, bring all of those entities together and to ensure that the Harwell Space Cluster continues on its exciting journey. I'll stop there. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Joanna. So yeah, next up we have Dr. Kira Manfletti, it's the president of Portugal Space. So Kira,
Okay.
over to you.
So likewise, I'm going to try and share my slides. And hopefully I'll be just as successful as Joanna was. So let's see. I hope you can see this. Yep. Okay, perfect. For me, first of all, again, thank you very much. Perhaps one of the interesting perspectives that I can provide here, as I'm not a cluster, is what is the agency perspective. And Portugal Space is a relatively new space agency. It was founded just last year. So one of the interesting dimensions is how do you found and how do you grow a space agency in times when space is really dramatically changing? What are the priorities that you have as you grow your space sector? Perhaps just stepping back a second, Portugal issued a space 2030 strategy just 2 years ago, stating that by 2030 it wants to be a global authority in space, climate, ocean interactions for socio-economic benefit, basically concentrating a bit on the Atlantic, which is for Portugal a great responsibility. But it does state a lot about having high-skilled jobs created and economic growth. And one of the tasks that the agency was given when it was created was to multiply by 10 the space sector in Portugal and create 1,000 skilled new jobs by 2030. Now, if we look at the numbers that we saw from Romain and from Joanna, of course, these numbers look very small, but the country is a different kind of size of country, and the funding available in the space sector is different. And this is quite a challenge. I mean, most space agencies are told that they should multiply by 3. So when I'm asked, how will you do this? It's clear for me that it's about bringing space to other sectors. It's about cross-sectoral policies. It's all about new businesses, right? Another thing that Portugal's stating is that they want to have an overall investment in the next 10 years, in the next decade, of about 2.5 billion, with a 50% public and 50% private investment. Okay, so it's very much about commercial business. Now, just a little bit about the agency. Was created last year. When I first arrived, there wasn't much. We didn't even have a bank account, so I very much felt myself like a startup. So in some ways, I do feel, I do know how it feels. No bank account, no money, you have to hire people, you don't have offices. It's a great challenge. The agency was not created as part of a single ministry. It was founded as a private not-for-profit organization with public sector funding. This meant that it has sort of stakeholders, shareholders from different ministries. And here you see the operative arms of some of the ministries we have on board: the Ministry of Science, Technology and Higher Education, the Ministry of the Economy and the Ministry of Defense, as well as one of the regional governments, because Portugal has 2 autonomous regions, with the other autonomous region coming on board relatively soon. Now, the great thing about this is that we get to respond to the requirements of the entire country. And another thing is that we get to talk about businesses to all of these ministries, including to the Ministry of Defense. And this does create for interesting discussions when we tell military people that they need to be customers and they have to think in a business way. And this promotes, as I said, space as a service, space as a sector for growth for all other sectors. So we do really much see space as an infrastructure and an enabler. And one of the things that's important for Portugal is when we look back in history at how the space development started, it was very much thanks to ESA and the industrial policy that enabled us to really trigger dedicated investment in certain fields, because otherwise the competition outside of the country with the big players would have been just too big. So it did really enable us to develop the space sector in Portugal. But we very much were limited to equipment and component. And nowadays we see that there is a diversification of the platforms that we can use to put in play in space and create new markets. And this has become extremely important and interesting for the country, because the country can now also, with relatively small companies, also aim to have system and subsystem leadership. So this is also an extremely important element about growing business in Portugal and having a critical mass of industries so that we can actually establish ourselves as market leaders in whatever niches that we can identify for the country. You know, just to give you an idea of one of the ideas, and there's many. One of the things that we're looking at as a country is a small satellite constellation, which is government fostered but industry driven, to have, it's user oriented, possibly multinational, monitoring the Atlantic in real time, but also for socioeconomic exploitation. And it's a very interesting exercise to try and explore both the upstream with these additional ambitions, as well as the downstream with everything that's happening in terms of services and everything possible that you could think of in terms of services for the downstream. Anything from autonomously moving aquacultures to indeed providing secure and secure environment for maritime for shipping and maritime applications. Now, as I said before, for us, it's clear then, you know, when people ask me, how are you actually going to multiply the sector by 10? I give a very simple answer. You know, the moment other businesses realize that space will add to their competitive advantage, then I have to, you know, I can relax and my job's already done, because they're going to start integrating space in their businesses, and I don't have to do anything anymore. They're going to start hiring people and having space as part of the solution. So for us, it's very much about knocking on people's doors of all other sectors, from energy companies, from cork companies, which is, well, one of the big industrial sectors in Portugal, and really trying to present space as something that can give them a competitive edge. And in this environment, we're actually very happy about the business incubation center that we had in Portugal, especially because it's not just the business incubation center, it's a space solutions center, which adds the incubation part, the ambassador platform, and the innovation element to it. But what we've done is, through a call that was issued and concluded just recently, we've actually extended this network to across the country. So we now have 15 centers that will actually act as part of this innovation network, because we want to bring space to every single part of the nation, and we want to make it feasible for local people, local municipalities, local companies to actually have access to this network. So we're going to everyone, and again, we're presenting space as a solution, and we're trying to engage them as much as possible as we can in the dialogue. I think that's all I want to add for now. There's a lot more that I could say, but it's better if I stop here. I understand there's going to be questions and answers in any case afterwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kira. Next is Sarah Fleischer, Economic Advisor to the Luxembourg Space Agency. So over to you, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm not going to have slides today, but I hope to keep this more interactive, I'm just going to kind of explain you a little bit of what LSA is, where our space heritage comes from in our country, and what I exactly do at the Luxembourg Space Agency. So many people ask themselves, how does this small country, middle of Europe, is engaged in the whole space initiative in our common world? And the easy answer is that a lot of people don't know is that one of the largest satellite operators in the world, which is SES, is based here in Luxembourg. They're one of the major players in satellite operations, satellite telecommunication, and this happened in the 80s. So 1980s, our government supported that crazy idea back then to support a satellite communication company, where many people ask themselves, why do we need any satellite at all? Because back then it was very military and governmental driven. And why do we need more TV channels? Back then we had 4 TV channels. Now we're happy we have endless TV channels. So Luxembourg always had a big vision and a big favor for space. And in 2016, Luxembourg introduced its space initiative in space resources. So we have a huge vision that we believe in the future that humans will use the resources in space to make space sustainable. So using the water from the surface of the moon on Mars, using the space regolith, maybe for 3D printing, to building constructions, building the moon base in the future, getting propellant from the water, oxygen, hydrogen from the moon, from the ice of the moon, and so on and so forth. We don't want to use all these resources that we have on Earth, bring it to space, and then kind of go beyond that and live in the future on other planets and maybe on the moon. So that's the grand vision that Luxembourg is following. And we really believe that this is going to happen. And until then, we want to support innovative space ventures that are important and relevant now. And I think the people before me just mentioned it quite nicely that, you know, today we can't survive without space technologies. GPS wouldn't be existent without satellite technologies. We couldn't call an Uber because Uber wouldn't be able to find us. All the logistics, communication with planes and ships would not be possible, and weather forecasting would not even be as accurate as nowadays without satellite communication. So I think a lot of industries realize that space is a key technology to also enable them to also leap forward to the next, I would say, digitalization age. So if you want to connect devices in remote areas where there is no Wi-Fi, this can only happen with satellites, or is one of the options as well. Artificial, I would say, autonomous driving would in the future only be possible, or mainly be possible with satellite communication. And we can go continue the list. The list is long. What is possible through satellite communication and space technologies. So that's what we started in 2016. In 2018, we started the Luxembourg Space Agency. So we're also a very young space agency, and our main purpose is here to drive and promote the commercial space activities in our countries, and that means we need to set up legal frameworks. So we have a legal team that is working on new legal frameworks to just make this possible in a legal perspective. Then we have an R&D team that supports R&D, supporting R&D initiatives at universities and other R&D labs. Then we have a team that really supports R&D activities of companies through R&D funding, ESA projects, and so on. And I am responsible for all the funding topics, meaning I need to make sure that the companies here in our ecosystem have access to money, which is not an easy task, because I would say space people have their own language, and investors need to understand what is actually the main benefit and purpose of what purpose the space ventures can bring along to other industries. So looking into that, I need to make sure that we have enough funding mechanisms here in the country. So we just launched the Orbital Ventures, which is an early stage VC that can invest into early stage companies. And not only in Luxembourg, but also globally, which is great. And now at the moment, I'm working on setting up a startup incubator and the business division at the European Space Resources Innovation Center, which will mainly focus on space resources. Some people might think this is very visionary and very futuristic, but one of the key components here is actually to combine the current problems on Earth and linking it to exactly the same challenges that we will face on the moon and in space if we want to really live outside of Earth. So we have similar problems regarding to water, agriculture, food. How can we grow crops with little resources? Energy, how can we store energy more efficiently? How can we produce energy more efficiently? These are exactly the same problems that we face here on Earth. And anything regarding to mobility, logistics, and autonomous vehicles and robotics. So that's what I do, and happy to answer some Q&A later.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So the next Q&A. So I see a few questions sort of coming through on Twitter. So if you do have any questions there, either on Twitter or on YouTube, please feel free to post them. We have a hashtag Spaceoneers live. So first, a few sort of questions from myself. So Romain, I noted an interview that you did. You mentioned astronomy. So how important would you say it is to get acquainted with the local ecosystem there?
Yeah, I mentioned Astrome, and it's a very good example. And we have other companies actually coming from India, from Asia, and also from the US. I get they are looking for talents, and so yeah, it's very important, and we are here for that to connect international companies or newcomers in our region, to help to connect with universities and with also something interesting is the whole network of SMEs. We have very technical knowledge here, and it's sometimes difficult when you're a newcomer to find resources. And we also have, I already mentioned, but we have a cluster, R&D cluster called Aztec Paris region, and it's a well established cluster. But 15 years ago, they were created by the French government. So again, this is our main role, and we have to to push those companies in front of the universities of R&D labs, and find and it's a very, very interesting job to connect those newcomers with the local ecosystem.
Yeah. So Joanna, you showed a huge number of different companies and startups there behind you. So are there any particular success stories that you could share with us?
So there's a whole range. I mentioned Oxford Space Systems with their lightweight deployable antennas. They've gone from startup in 2014 to 50 people. Similarly, Resitech, sort of similar numbers, but more on the downstream applications. Open Cosmos is another one. They went through the use of BIC, arriving in 2015. They're now 70 people and building their own sort of satellite platforms. So those are the sort of, three of the many that we've got there. I noted from Sarah the sort of real focus on planetary resources in Luxembourg. One of the areas that we're looking at in the UK is on space debris management, the sort of recognition and understanding of the space situational awareness, just where all the objects are in space, and then how do we actually manage that debris, and what's the sort of legal structure around that. So Astroscale is a company, a global company, but has a base at Harwell, and they've been developing their program to sweep up space, as it were, is their tagline. And so it's exciting to have that sort of new area in Harwell Space Cluster as well.
That's fantastic. Quite a few questions here coming on YouTube. So there's one, first of all, for Kira. So there's a Portuguese engineer that's working on space sector. Like, what was the best approach to fund a business idea?
Well, of course, there's different ways of going about it. I'm not sure. It really depends on the idea, really. So we do have our business incubation center, and of course, he or she could pitch the idea to a business incubation center. There's a number of actually also venture capitalists that are really starting to look into the space sector, and we are trying to bring these venture capitalists also to talk to our business incubation centers. We've actually brought them in also in evaluating the proposals for the new business incubation centers. So that's certainly also one of the tools that would be at his or her disposal. I guess that's where I would start for sure. Yeah.
Do we have another question for you as well, Kira?
Yeah,
it's
sure.
Very popular. Someone is very interested to note that you've expanded to 15 centres for different space solution centres. So how do you expect to create like space clusters around each one? Would you have like different sort of focus areas there?
Well, I guess this will happen naturally, Ryan. I mean, it's clear that these regions have different challenges, right? And this is part of the reason why we've reached out to them, because they're different regions. Some of them are remote regions in Portugal, and they have their specific focus areas. So yes, I think this is going to naturally happen, but we won't necessarily limit to that. So we want to open the doors, and we want to see what comes. And of course, then we'll start talking to the local authorities and municipalities, starting to raise awareness for the fact that we're there. On the one hand, to raise funds. On the other hand, to make sure that people are aware of the fact that if they're interested in approaching the space sector, that's where they can sort of the first door they can knock on is they don't have to go all the way to Lisbon. It's just around the corner, right? So we won't impose, but I think it's naturally going to happen for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So a question, I guess, for Sarah. So how can we be more effective at spotting or scouting talent, say for new space ventures or startups? So you mentioned about supporting startups through different economic support there. How can you know that you spot that talent and can know that it is an investable company?
That's a very good question. I think that's what most VCs are asking themselves once they actually have their first business plan in their hands from a space company. I would say you have two components of a space venture. One is you need great, fantastic engineers who actually build the stuff. But then you need someone in the team who can actually communicate what's the real value of the business. What is the real problem that you're trying to solve? And then identifying and basically arguing that space technology is the proper and the most efficient solution to that problem that you're trying to solve. So it's not really like person-based. It's more team structure of the team that is trying to do fundraising, either from us, from governments, or to private investors. You just need to show that there's a real purpose for you and that space technology is the most efficient and the best solution to the problem that you're trying to solve. So it's really like, that's a need-driven what you're trying to do. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. So a question for Joanna. So it seems like space clusters are very upstream focused. That's what someone here on YouTube thinks. So how important is the development of clusters to be focused around downstream applications based on Earth observation data?
So I would argue that the best thing, and certainly at Harwell, is we've got a really good mix of upstream and downstream. So companies, some of the companies are full service or reasonably full value chain anyway, like the GMVs and the Deimoses. But we've then got companies like Resitech, and there are other activities. It's always hard to remember every single name when I'm there, and they're all back to front to me. But there's a whole range of companies that are also doing downstream applications. Either that might be something like Archangel Imaging, which is more about using AI at a place and then sending a quick signal. So you've got something that's going on in location and sending it. But there's also quite a lot of companies doing the analysis of the data to develop those new applications. And I think what's really important is when you've got those all together, because the upstream companies are developing the new sensors that are going to provide the improved data in the future. If they can understand more about who's actually using the service, what the actual sort of capabilities are that they need, you can really put those two together. And so that having that mix of people and that ongoing discussion is really important.
Ryan, can I sort of jump in if it's okay? Because I just wanted to say something. I mean, of course, I totally agree with what Joanna said, but she was talking, for example, about space situational awareness and providing services, or at least, sweeping up space. That's something that may sound like an upstream development, but in theory, it's a service that you'd be providing, right? So it's not the classical downstream in terms of an application, but it's a service. So I think that sometimes thinking in pure upstream and downstream isn't necessarily the way that we will think about space in the future, because business models are becoming hybrid, and this division between upstream and downstream is something that we have in our minds, which will be disrupted as well. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay. I guess, this is a question for, I suppose, each of you. So, feel free to sort of jump in. But what are the main assets that you have if a startup in space wants to grow? So maybe I'd take Kiri. You mentioned your with the use of BICs there in Portugal and expanding there. Do you want to sort of add to that?
Well, I think what I can say is, I mean, I'm sure that a space startup could be well hosted in each one of the countries that sort of presented here, right? What's great about Portugal at the moment is that the countries really recognize that space is a long-term investment, and it's about economic growth, and it's not just toys for boys and girls. And you really see it in everything the country's doing around space. So this is certainly something that where a startup will feel welcome in the country, because that mentality is really spreading across. We do have our business incubation network, which we've spread across the country. But we're also trying to do is now, of course, for the country itself, we now have an agency that's really supporting the sector. And what I always say to people is that the agency is very much acting like a business development unit for the whole ecosystem, for all companies around. So they're not on their own. They can certainly talk to us, and we will help them, right? We will both prod them with questions and ask questions like investors, which they probably won't like. But at the same time, we'll help them knock on doors that they won't as easily access by themselves. So we're here, we're happy to support, and you know, they have a business development unit that they can't afford by themselves. So
yeah, I certainly echo that. I mean, I think, you know, anyone in Europe that's got a startup idea, do look at the ESA Business Incubation Centres. They're available across Europe, you know, are really worth engaging, and particularly through the ambassador platforms, that really helps as well. I think the key thing for anyone who's starting up a business is get your pitch book right. If your grandparent can't understand it, then it's probably not at the right level. It's about getting, once you've got that really short pitch right, remembering that the people that you are going to get the money from are not space tech specialists. Once you've got over that, then I think that really helps. And there's lots of help in, you know, right the way across Europe. VCs have been mentioned in Luxembourg. There are similar VCs in the UK, like Space Camp is as a sort of pre-piece before the Seraphim Space Fund. You know, there are lots of opportunities and lots of help out there, but get that pitch book right, really keep testing it out with as many people as possible, and then look at those funding opportunities. I think the advantage of the ESA BIC is if you can get through a fairly rigorous selection process, you've got that sort of, you've been part of the ESA BIC stamp, which I really think helps companies on that journey.
Fantastic.
Yeah, if I can add,
So,
yeah, just I totally agree. Europe is a fantastic place to start a space business, and ESA BIC is doing a great job, and we have ESA BIC north of France. Just maybe to answer your question specifically, Ryan, as our main asset in the Paris region, and I always told that to the company we meet, is the talented people we have, and also the perhaps both French and international company. I'll give you the example of a space startup called Trust Me. They are located close to Paris, and they have 12 different nationalities for a team of 20 people. And I remember a discussion with the founder, and she told me that it was fantastic to work with the French tech visa, because in a few months you get visa for people to join her company. So it was very attractive for her, and maybe that's one of our main assets in France and in the Paris region.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything else to add there? No. Okay, I think then that's we can call the end of our second sort of webinar here on for Spaceoneers Live. So I just want to thank all of our panelists today for joining us from different clusters across Europe. So our next Spaceoneers Live panel will focus on investment in the space industry. So yeah, do join us on in 2 weeks' time. So that'll be the 16th of July, same time, same place. So yeah, look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone.
Thank you very much. This was fun.